floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So basically, my concept is about equating to Harambee spirit to Ubuntu, and seeing this as an opportunity for change in the fight against corruption. So basically, the concept of Ubuntu as used in Central and South Africa countries is the same as what if you were in Tanzania, they will call Ujamaa, as what my predecessor, that is Philip Kagushe, was commenting in the morning. And if you're in Zambia, then you'll talk about something like black tax or something like that. So Harambee in Kenya is not a new concept. It is something that has been there even before the colonial. So when we got our independence in 1963, the Harambee spirit had been ingrained in the philosophy of the communities even before then. So that if you go to various sub-tribes in Kenya, there are over 44 sub-tribes in Kenya, you find that they still use this word Harambee in different terms. They are using it in different dialects. Now, the Harambee spirit per se, it has come to mean the provision of goods and usually social infrastructure through voluntary cooperation of members of the community. It was more like beefed up during the 1986 by the second president of Kenya, that is Daniel Arap Moi, who embodied that Harambee ideas have mutual assistance, joint effort, mutual social responsibility, and community of self-help. Then, the key part then is when you look at this concept of Harambee, where are they kind of like aligned to the spirit of fighting corruption? So in the last election, which my colleague, I think my countryman Samuel Kimeu alluded to, the last election, we had a case where the tribes of northeastern, that is the tribes from Marsabit, Somali, Rendile, Boranas, the elders were sitting down to appoint among various leaders who are aspiring to become member of parliaments and senators. And they were selecting who among them has the best attributes in terms of integrity, in terms of articulating the issues on the ground, the social aspects, and in terms of leading the community. So then these are the ones that they promoted, and most of them ended up winning the national elections. So what does it mean? It means that actually the philosophy of Harambee is enshrined in every community, but it's in a silent way. The spirit also can be seen in that fact that when communities, for example, villages and even in estates, a kid misbehaves, a community can sit down and they are custodians of ethical principles. They discipline or guide a child or even an adult. And this shows the aspect of coming together and knowing what are the norms and what are the values that the society holds on. This then can influence the aspect of what is the moral good, what should the community look like. And I mean, when I use the word Harambee, I interchange it with the word Ubuntu. So it's the same spirit, but different because of the location. That is the way I've said. Then, in conclusion of my presentation then is that for us, Harambee in Kenya is promoted as a cultural, social, economic, and political philosophy, but it does offer an avenue in which corruption can be mitigated in Kenya and indeed in Africa. Harambee from independence was aimed at fighting three things perceived to be enemies, which were diseases, ignorance, and poverty in Kenya. It is on the same strength that we perceive Harambee philosophy can be utilized to fight corruption. I mean, if you look at these three things, diseases, ignorance, and poverty, that is basically what vices which are coming through also because of corruption. or unethical behaviors. This means handling corruption epidemic via a community cooperation vehicle can be maybe one of the solutions or avenues to fight this epidemic. Lastly, the paper concludes that Harambee spirit is being applied in the war against corruption in various silent ways in Kenya. This means that the impact of, if amplified, can be an opportunity for change. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for this lovely presentation. For sure, harassing the spirit of Harambee can be a beacon against corruption. Thank you for that. Next, we have Jane Shambare. I don't know if Jane is here with us. I'm not being able to see if she has joined our session. Paul, if you might assist me confirming if Jane is here with us.
Jane, Madam Jane hasn't joined us yet. Let's just see. We might be running, let's see, 1400. So we might be running a little bit ahead of when she's expected to come through. So that's fine. So there might be questions. Folks, I think I'm going to suggest something, and please shoot me down. We're sitting in a very staid, tight type of situation here. Maybe those of you that wish to, please open your cameras and let's see everybody that we've got online. I do know some people think that bandwidth is not such a good thing and it eats a lot of bandwidth. That is a fallacy. But maybe just open your cameras and let me open mine and talk about that as well. So I think maybe let's just have more of a discussion. We don't have a lot of attendees on board. So let's rather just have a bit of a discussion. If you want to put your camera off, put your camera off. But it would be nice if we can see the faces of the people that we're talking to, like the other group that are sitting in one room. Let's maybe just open the cameras. I will move the other 3 attendees that are on the attender side. I'll send them a message now, and they can then move up to panelists as well. So you can have a round table discussion rather than a staid discussion. I hope I'm not going to get into trouble for this, but that's kind of what I do. We do take these chances. Adam is still leading the discussion, and I think Neil's going to help out as well with the discussion. So if you want to come on board as a camera person, let's do that. Let's have a discussion. I will put my camera off because this is not my area of expertise. So I will sit in the background, but I will help you sort out things in the background as we're going through from there. Adam, sorry about that, but I think it's probably better to have a discussion in the process.
No worries, because if I saw correctly in the program, we gave 30 minutes for each panelist. So having the first panelist finishing at 1:40 leaves enough time for us to talk about a little bit more about Harambee. If I can ask, how can the spirit of Harambee be harnessed to counteract corruption in a contemporary Kenya society? Andrew, I don't know if in some way you will be a bit repetitive, but I would like to ask you that question if you don't mind.
So basically, the Harambee spirit brings out about the communities. So you find most of the things, like, for example, corruption, the whistleblowing. Most people who will do whistleblowing will come from the community. So basically, if people can be able to say, we have let's say the law enforcers, we can give them information about a case, whistleblowing. And this is just Harambee. It's coming from the community. We have things like unexplained wealth, what Philip was talking about in the morning. Most of the time you have wealth, but the community which you are staying with will know that this guy has wealth, which can't even be explained where it's coming from. They can just raise and say, okay, we see this guy misbehaving or overspending, and we don't know the source. We don't see the source of funds. So then what happened is it becomes like a good idea to start from in fighting against corruption. There are issues to do with, for example, silent forms of corruption. For example, a traffic police officer earning a certain amount X, but suddenly this guy is having so much wealth that you can't equate with what they are earning versus what they have, and you know they are on. There are issues to do with like complicated kind of businesses that somebody can give you a hint where to start from when you're looking at maybe how the web of corruption, where these funds are. So basically, what are we saying is that even the thieves, they are within our society. So if you are, if you are in good tabs with the society, that is the community, then it's very easy for you to fight corruption rather than doing it independently in silos, expecting you'll get all the knowledge without reaching out to the community. So that's how Harambee comes in.
Great, Andrew. That was a very good explanation. Thank you for that. I don't know if the participants here would like to ask any question. I have another question for Andrew, but Kali wants to ask questions. Neil, but I think Kali was the first one. Kali, please proceed. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Andrew, I agree with you. I think communities are very important. They are important in the fight against corruption. And like you have said, the spirit of Harambee, basically, where does it originate? It's from there, from the community itself. But unfortunately, the communities have been disempowered. They've been disempowered in a variety of ways for people who have, sinister interest to pursue their corrupt activities. And my question, Andrew, is how can we take back the power back to the societies, to the people, so that they can be a force against the fight for corruption? Thank you.
So on top of my mind, the first thing is what Samuel Kimeu said today morning, election. You see, our leaders are coming from society, but the way we have done election in Africa is that the people who have influence or wealth are likely to sway the results and the populace as compared to actually somebody who is good. Like somebody who deep down is a good person, wants to do the best. So what happened is that is the first thing, and that affects even what you guys were talking in the morning, state capture. It starts from our leaders, but the leaders are coming from the society. So then the first thing is to reach out a way whereby we elect you not because you are able to influence something that we feel it's for our interest and not for the other people's interest, but more of like genuinely this is the right candidate to do the right way. So the first thing is, how do we vote? How do we elect our leaders? The second thing is, how do we make the communities also be enriched? Like there's so much poverty. So one of the major things is a leader who has so much wealth is likely to sway the populace to his whim. But if the populace is able to invest, it's able to grow itself, people are able to say, I have my own income and I don't have to depend on a certain leader to give me this, then there's a chance that we can empower the community back to do this. The third one is the infrastructures and the structures that we have, like simple things, whistleblowing, protection, laws that are giving protection against people who are whistleblowing. How effective are they? How do we go and do investigations? The issue is the society knows the right thing. We know what we are supposed to do. But the question is, how do they then have vocal say? Vocal say in the sense that their voice is counted. Even if it's one individual, somebody can listen and act onto it. But when we muffle that, then what happened is we disenfranchise the society and the fight becomes a challenge. I think maybe I've addressed it a little. Wow.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. That was very good. Neil, would you like to take the floor and ask your question, please. You're on mute. Neil, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I would. I should know this by now. I should. It's only how many 3 years into the post-COVID. I was saying, Kylie, it's good to see your face. You were very vocal in this morning's meetings, and now we see a face next to a next to a name. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. I mean, so there were really interesting conversations this morning, which I think tie in, you know, with your presentation, Andrew. And one of those is, you know, is this notion of a longer history associated with what we see today, you know, and I think it was Gaspar and Samuel who made reference to this kind of colonial history and this colonial evolution of things. Yeah, sorry, just hold on a minute. Yeah, no, sorry, leave it. Thank you. Sorry, yeah. So you mentioned society knows the right thing, and I think it was Gaspar who made this joke that Africa has exported development aid to the rest of the world, and what it's got back in return from the West is governing rationalities. You know, Western governing rationalities of capitalism, governing rationalities of individualism, which are completely antithetical to African rationalities, which I think characterize Harambee and which characterize Ubuntu and Hunu and you know, this cluster of African philosophies. My question is, have we not gotten to the stage where as Africans we almost need to recreate those systems because they've just been so dismantled and disrupted by this onslaught of Western ideas and Western thoughts? I mean, we talk about being, you know, applying Ubuntu in a capitalist sense. For me, that just doesn't make any sense. One is an individualistic pursuit of self-interest. The other is a community-based responsibility or duty to a community, not the individual. Like for me, I'm just wondering whether we don't need to completely reconstruct or as Africans, we can't almost rely on those old philosophies other than as in some sort of inspiration for a future, you know, construction of a future philosophical basis, just because we've had this imposition of foreign ideas from people who look like me and come from where I originally come from. So yeah, that's my question. Bit of an essay. Thanks.
Yeah, the issue is, you see, like if you are looking at the Western, the way they, according to, like if you look at according to Beidelman, he says that when the Western scholars, they use the word morality as opposed to ethics when they are discussing values within African content, that tells you one thing, that to the Western scholars, when they look at Africa, they look at it in a different lens when they're talking about issues that we are talking about, like, for example, ethics. And like, you see, when you popularize a philosophy like Ubuntu, so you find the interpretation from us, we understand it's like a way of life, like just a normal thing that we do comfortably. But when you look at you are in Europe or in US and you are telling people, come together, we contribute funds for a medical, a fundraising for a medical cause for a certain individual. It's a foreign concept because they are like, why should we do that? I mean, but to us, it's so simple. Like if you go to Zambia, the black tax, it's so easy to find a kid of an uncle staying with you because they are like, it's part of the community to raise somebody else's kids within our homes and everything. But if you go to Western world, you find the concept of you raising somebody else's kids. I mean, first of all, the laws and the regulations just becomes a nightmare. So then I agree with you. It's a matter of us setting our own philosophy and describing it in our own content, rather than waiting for somebody to prescribe for us what should we equate Ubuntu to, for example. we are the ones to decide. Ubuntu stands for this, it does this, rather than somebody coming and imposing it onto you. So I agree with you. I agree with you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Kali, for these contributions. We are 8 minutes to start the next. I don't know if we should, we are exhausting here a bit about the Harambe discussions. I don't know if we are able to have the next panelist, if we don't have any more questions related to Andrew's presentation, but if not, if it's possible, I don't know if Professor Shinwe is here or Dr. Nugunde, if they're around. And I see Nina is here, but it's pushing her to. she is the sixth person talking, so I don't want to anticipate as much, but because we have very few joining us, I'm not sure if we can proceed as such, or even ask Kali. Kali has been very participating in all discussions, and looking forward to hearing what Kali has to present to us related to fighting corruption in light of Ubuntu ethic, a South African perspective. I don't know if we can proceed in such a way, or is there any suggestion? Ximena says I can share, but let's see if, because in our agenda we would have Jane that has not joined us. Professor Shinwe would follow Jane, then Dr. Nugunde, and then Dr. Kali, and then Nina, following by Promise, and then Dr. Promise, and we have another presentation from Andrew regarding the worm's eye view on ethics in Kenya. So since we have Andrew here, Andrew, I'm not sure if you want to go forward with that, so we can liberate you on your presentations, because Andrew will talk about worm eye in view on ethics in Kenya. So would you like to do the presentation, please?
Yes, I think I can roll on with it. So basically, the worm's eye view, this is how, like, a layman looks at ethics in Kenya. So I was trying to capture the spirit of when a person on the streets think about the ethics or the values that we have in Kenya. What's their view? So that's why I was looking at it from the layman's person. Then, in a nutshell, the common good accumulation of ideas, governance, and monitoring and better management, if applied aptly in mitigating corruption, can yield success. Now, beside mutually enforcing activities, collective performance measures, and shared accountability outcomes, the main fight of corruption is hinged on an individual level of integrity, one's moral value set before the society comes into place. Corruption, which manifests itself from failed ethics, it's like sin. It cannot be eradicated, but rather it has to be mitigated to low levels. So when you hear people saying zero tolerance to corruption, or we are going to eliminate corruption, I think that will be a wrong way to say it. You just need to mitigate it and mitigate the effects to low levels. The same way we do on an epidemic. You don't think that you'll eradicate the whole thing, but just reducing the impact. Then today I was fortunate because the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Deputy Director, who apparently also supports us, talked about the EACC, their mandates. So basically, the mandates of EACC is a constitutional commission in Kenya entrusted with the task of combating and preventing corruption. So basically, in a nutshell, their mandate is enshrined in 4: law enforcement, preventive measures, public education, and promotion of integrity and ethics. But their key functions then is they do investigation, they coordinate enforcement of anti-corruption in Kenya, they conduct corruption risk assessment, and they develop implementation of preventive measures. When you look at it in terms of economic sphere now, the risk levels for predicted offenses in Kenya are grouped into three: the high risk, medium risk, and low risk. The high risk are related to fraud and forgery related offenses. This entails things like corruption and economic crimes, embezzlement of public funds, and then unexplained wealth. Issues to do with that falls under high risk. Medium is issues to do with the environmental and wildlife crimes. Things like tax offenses, money laundering falls under that. And then as per the Financial Reporting Center, when you go to their website, they have categorized this as the third one to be low risk, that is human trafficking and smuggling of persons. Then, in my view, how do we mitigate corruption? Now, a purely technocratic approach or a law enforcement crime chasing effort to tackling corruption is not going to succeed. The attitude towards corruption should be on how to mitigate corruption rather than aiming to eradicate corruption. Corruption should be viewed in the same length as an epidemic, and the concerted effort should be stakeholders working together towards minimizing the damage caused by corruption. That is what Samuel and Philip were talking about, collaborations, and other speakers today morning. The role of private sector has also been talked about, like in today morning, but the key part of why private sectors are supposed to be at the forefront in fighting corruption is two mainly. One, resourcefulness allies. The private sector, as Philip had alluded to in the morning, is taken to be like a supply side of corruption. What it means is they have abundant resources, and also they have the ability to act swiftly on combating corruption. The private entities view ethics generally as accepted values and norms, and this guides their daily behaviors. In the essence, then, this can be a good guide to fighting corruption. The second issue why the role of private sector is very key in fighting corruption is that the private sector can be able to help in legislative, pushing for legislations that can shape. Like in Kenya, in 2016, the private sector sponsored the first anti-bribery act in Kenya legislation. Now that act, section 9 of that act talks about enjoining the public and private entities to develop procedures and prevention of bribery. This was the first case that private sectors were involved in. And that means that we have private sectors who can push forward this effort. Then, even when you put this legislation, there is the law enforcement challenges. Now, the key challenges for law enforcement in fight against corruption in Kenya are two. One, in my view, collaboration efforts. Now, we have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission where Philip Kagushe sits. This is in charge with, it's actually a commission designated with investigation to do with corruption. But at the same time, we have Director of Criminal Investigation. This is a body under the National Police Service that has a mandate to investigate any case of criminal in nature. Now, including corruption. So when corruption is criminal in nature, they can investigate it. Now, the biggest problem now here is when both of them, they have their cases they investigate, both of them converge with Director of Public Prosecution. That is, they forward their cases to Director of Public Prosecution for onward transmission to the courts or the process, the due process of going to court. The biggest problem comes out is when there is success rates, conviction success rates differing. Like maybe ethics and anti-corruption has more success in prosecuting the cases as compared to Director of Criminal Investigation. In the eye of the public, the law people, what happened is they feel like one is doing well, another one is doing not well. Remember, their methodology on how they fight corruption could be different. Actually, it's different. But the common good, the common goal is one. Now, they have to avoid this by collaborating so that there is the war against corruption can be won. One of the ways is they have to overcome conflicts among themselves. They have to eliminate duplication of efforts. You don't go investigate one case only to find that another department had already started something close to that. And lastly, they have to reduce delayed prosecution. And that can only become if they collaborate. The second biggest challenge on law enforcement is lag in keeping up with innovations. So you find because these entities, the Director of Criminal Investigation and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission in Kenya are public entities, though they are independent in some way. They have independence and autonomy. They have strict budgets, tight budgets. So then the innovation aspect, the research aspect is key in keeping up with the current challenges that are coming up through different ways. Like, for example, what we were talking about wealth and the wealth that cannot be explained where it's coming from. As I come to conclusion, the strategies then are: one, corruption risk assessment. This is conducting, we have to enhance entities to conduct risk assessment, to identify vulnerable areas and implement targeted preventive measures. Two, we need to promote ethical leadership. Like, if you check in Kenyan Constitution, Chapter 6, it covers integrity and governance. This is one of the hardest chapter to fully implement in the Kenyan Constitution. Why? Because even the people who are passing some of these laws are the same people you are taking to court. So you find a member of parliament who passes a law is being taken to court. So it becomes a little bit challenging to do with integrity and governance issues there. The third one is public participation, as we had talked earlier in the previous presentation. Now, the public participation helps because through public participation, you find that the Kenya Anti-Corruption the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Unit has been able to successfully had 9 convictions for cases of unexplained wealth as at June 2023, as compared to a country like UK, which had only 2. It's funny because I'm talking about UK and the king is in my town today, Mombasa. So then that shows you the success rates. Like, we have some successes that we can actually talk about compared to countries like UK when it comes to things like unexplained wealth. Then there is an initiative called Blue Company Initiative that has come up in Kenya, or rather that is ongoing in Kenya by senior private sector leaders. This is towards moving from rule-based strategies to moving to value-based focus. You see, when you look at the current methodology of fighting corruption, we are looking at things like having codes of conduct, strict procedures, legislations. This has a pessimistic trait in it. But the key part there is to avoid unethical behavior. But now the shift of paradigm is to move towards value-based approach, where we focus on ethical behavior through training programs, development of ethical codes, and coaching. The value-based strategies then will be fostering on things like culture of integrity and ethics. And key part is just doing good for the sake of doing good, not doing good because you are being, because you have to abide with the codes of an entity or organization where somebody is working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you also for pushing up your last presentation to do it now. I don't know if we have any questions to Andrew. I have one question. Neil has a question, but let me hand the floor to Neil. Neil, feel free to ask question. Then Kali can also ask a question. Neil, please, you can take the floor.
Cool, thanks. It's more of a comment, and it's a tongue-in-cheek comment which I wanted to ask earlier. There was a lot of discussion about repatriating unexplained wealth, and I was thinking about exactly the same thing that Andrew was talking about, that the king is in the country And I was wondering when, as a continent, we're going to demand the repatriation of wealth from how many years of colonization to this country? Because if we go to yesterday's conversation, one of the key things which emerged is that corruption is very tightly correlated with poverty, and until such time as I think we have a situation where Africans as a continent are not fundamentally poor, the temptations and the capacity to buy Africans, as all of us is very high. And so here's a Pan-Africanist combined, what do they call it? Collaborative effort. Let's prosecute people who look like myself to bring back the money. As Julius Malema in South Africa, the FF leader, has this saying, pay back the money. I think it's time to seriously consider that repatriation of wealth from 400 years of colonization. That's just my tongue-in-cheek comment. Thanks.
Maybe if I can join on that through the chair. Today, key speaker said something about they managed to get
we are losing a bit, Andrew.
They send it through ambulances. I was trying to think whose idea was it, I was trying to think whose idea was it? Was it the country requiring ambulances, or the person repatriating deciding to send it through that? Because the issue is this: it's your wealth of the country. So if you are repatriating, isn't it supposed to be the country dictating the form of repatriation rather than? But that is just a comment to make.
Yeah, correct, Andrew. Thanks for that. Kali, please feel free to ask your question or comment.
Thank you so much, Adam. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Good. Andrew has got me thinking, actually, about his presentation now, looking at corruption from the layman's, lenses, and what I'm seeing is that it seems the layman doesn't have a say in the current approach that we have taken to fight corruption. He has no say. He has been disempowered. He doesn't even feature in what is going on now. What you see now is happening is that the discussions about corruption, where they are discussed and where different efforts and policies, name them all, where are they designed? They are designed in the boardrooms, not under the tree. Under the tree. For you to get to the boardroom, you need to have a license. You need to have a license to get there. But under the tree, everybody participates. Everybody is invited. So I think the approaches that we are having, Andrew, now is that they are kind of elitist. The approaches that we have are elitist. They are not necessarily bring everybody to participate in them. And to me, I think that's where the problem is. The stakeholders, yes, we are talking about collaboration. Let's collaborate is the way to go. But who is in this collaboration? Who are the stakeholders? I think we need to do a serious stakeholder analysis as to who are the people in the collaborative effort. Because to me, the elephant is in the room, like you have said, Andrew. The same people who are legislating against corruption, next day you find them, they are facing persecution because they are practicing what? Corruption. They have been part of the corruption. So who are we fooling who here, honestly? So that is basically my comment. I'm really worked up about this whole issue of collaboration. But while the whole issue is that the elephant is in the room, and until we deal with the elephant in the room, to find the true warriors for corruption, I think we'll be just scratching the surface, like we have seen over and over again. And yeah, it's like this approach that we have. They're just like a PRS exercise. Honestly, they are not really taking us anywhere. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Kali. Neil had a comment here on the chat, but those in power will not relinquish this power. As Freire said, the oppressor cannot liberate the oppressed. Only the oppressed can liberate themselves, and in so doing, they also liberate the oppressor, in the ultimate act of generosity. I also agree with that. If you don't mind, Andrew, I have a more general question, but it's something that I'm curious about. What unique ethical challenges are faced by everyday Kenyans that might not be immediately evident to policymakers or international observers? How do these challenges shape their perception of broader national ethics?
To me, the unique, and I think in the last five or 6 years, the Transparent International, it has ranked the Kenyan police to be the most corrupt department in Kenya. So the key part here is when you are caught doing a traffic offense, you have a problem of paying, let's say, 500 shillings to a policeman or paying 5,000 shillings in the law court. So ethically, we'll say, let me go to the court. But then you start looking at it in terms of the time you take to the court. Maybe you'll have a lawyer who will demand 10,000 shillings only for the court to be. So the cost that you incur, the stress you go through, then you make an ethical decision at that point. I mean, a bribe of 500 shillings or even 100 bob, it will save me 10,000 shillings and time. So that, to me, it's the first ethical problem you encounter for an average Kenyan. As like, it's not about the aspect of somebody doing a massive corruption deal, a tender or something like that. No, it's the day-to-day, the law enforcement, how the individual faces with that. And sometimes it's a challenging, because even you can imagine now when you are bribing a policeman, you are wondering, will he also take me in for the offense of, apart from the offense that I've committed, plus this other offense of trying to bribe him? Those are 2 offenses. So you have to make a decision. But again, you have to look at the psychology aspect. You have to look at the language, body language of that policeman. Will this one take it or not? And when you realize this one can take it, then you make a concise decision there and then. What am I trying to say in a nutshell is, when we talk about corruption, sometimes it's not very big things. It starts with these basic things that we do on day to day that leads us. A key thing, going to the bank and you're queuing. Then you see a lady coming and, she's expectant. You let her go in. She goes to the counter. That is normal. It's expected nature to let an expectant lady or a sick person, an old man, to go first before you, if you're okay. But then you find somebody bribing maybe for a service that you don't need to really bribe for. Then you realize that is also what now triggers all these circles. And then what the participants from Nigeria said, I think yesterday, that it becomes a norm, of a way of life, that you don't even think about it. Kids are born and they are not thinking about the values. Now, let me tell you something interesting. The other day, we changed the education system, the content in the education in primary and secondary school in Kenya. And one of the things that they have put from a low level is values. They are discussing values from grade 3. they are discussing values. Why? Because they realize this is the key in the fabric. Why? Because people have realized that corruption is too rampant, that it's a norm. That if you say you have bribed a policeman, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's not something to talk and take home. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, you did. Thank you very much for that. Neil also raised his hand. Neil, would you like to give some comments or questions?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's somebody else who has, because I've already had a shot, but I don't see other hands.
Feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by this continual. Oh, look, okay, so let me put it out there. I hate the corruption perception indices with a deadly passion, and part of it is because we label African countries as the most corrupt on the planet. It's like continuous. It's a narrative that's continuously flaunted, and much of it is based on the fact of this petty corruption at a very small level. And we say, oh, but we mustn't overlook the petty corruption because it's important. It's like bribing a policeman or stuff like that. But in the scale of things, I look at the scale of corruption which happens like on a global level. And you look at, I love Switzerland. Switzerland is one of the 5 least corrupt countries in the world. But for 100 years, 90% of the money which was associated with corruption was channeled through Switzerland. 25% of the economy comes from Swiss banking. So that means 25% of that country's wealth in the last 100 years has come from corruption. When we talk about like a policeman asking for, I'm not sure what 100 shillings is in dollars or rand, but like it's petty stuff. We need to be looking at those banking industries in Europe. Actually, if we want to focus, let's focus on the big shots, not the little guys. If we want to focus on what the problem is, focus on the arms industry. Where's the arms industry? 40% from the US, like the next, I don't know, 10, 15% from France and the UK. It's like, these are the corrupt industries on this planet. Banking, arms, oil, oil companies, Shell, BP, like the policeman on the streets of Nairobi or Johannesburg. Yeah, okay, I mean, it's not right, but honestly, we can't be focusing on that. We must be focusing on the big fish here because they just float under the radar. They either write themselves out of the corruption definitions or they just beyond like mentioned because they are our financial heroes. So anyway, that's a bit of another rant from me, which I probably should have had in the plenaries today, but didn't get a chance.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Andrew, would you like to take some comments around that?
I agree with you. Like I was fortunate to have a discussion with Philip some times back, the ESCC deputy director, and he said that sometimes people perceive the bodies that are fighting corruption are supposed to sort out every corruption deal in the country. But they are not like superhuman to be everywhere. So they have to focus on what are the key corrupt cases. So Neil, you are right that we need to focus on what is the major big corruption deals and what have you. Let me quip something about the West versus Africa. When you are applying for a visa to UK, I'm using UK as an example in this case, they will tell you normal application of visa is X amount. But if you want to have priority processing of the visa, you pay something slightly more. Now in Kenya, that will be corruption. If I want a service from you, I don't need to pay slightly more to get a priority service. I am entitled to get the service at the prescribed rate. But when you tell me now, change a little. But now, when you put it in Kenyan content, that is corruption. I mean, this policeman or this migration guy is taking a bribe. But when you go to UK, it's called, and it's documented very well in the form. Normal application for visa is X amount in pounds. Priority application is X plus this. Now, that plus facilitation actually, in my view, is corruption, but in a softer way. That is what Neil is saying, that I think sometimes when you look at Western world, There are aspects of corruption that people may not be talking about the way we are amplifying our own. Our own is because we are here, we are the ones feeling it, but maybe we are better off than them by far. Maybe Africa, we are better off than Europe. We don't know. I mean, so that is the thing.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Very, very nice discussions around this. I appreciate Andrew, Neil, Kali for your interventions. It's been very good. I don't know if you have more questions to Andrew. It can be related to both of the topics that he gave to us, but I don't see any more questions, not even hands raised. If we can move on to the next panelist, that would be fantastic. Jane has not joined us within this time. I assume that is Professor Shinwe here with us? Paul, are you able to assist me confirming if Professor
Professor
Shinwe?
Professor Shinwe, no, she's not with us, or he's not with us. I'm just having a look through the list.
Yes.
No, none of them. Yeah, and I have in the background sent them mails as well, but I haven't had a response from them.
No worries. Is Dr. Nukunde here?
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Nukunde, would you like to do your presentations around foundations for anti-corrupt behavior, how families empower individuals for integrity through character building and personality development? Dr. Nukunde, are you here with us? If you are here, you may.
Okay, let's just recap here. We've got Chameen coming on board, who's a replacement for Dr. Onanga. I'm not sure what the subject was. She was going to be doing a plenary session in a live session, and she's handling one here now. So she was going to do an anecdote to capitalism. Am I right in that?
That's correct.
That's correct. We're getting a few things right. I don't know how to pronounce the introduction.
It's fine, Shimin. The introduction is Jangiz.
And Jangiz. Okay, I will learn a lot while I'm listening in the background to this. So, a little bit of an intro, Adam. Sorry, a bit of a change around.
No worries.
Chameen is going to be handling this presentation.
Is it the crony capitalism as driver of inequality and genesis of brain drain in Nigeria? Is that the subject? No.
No, the subject.
Can you please introduce
the subject?
so that we are all aware. Please take the floor, Shimene.
Okay, thank you so much. Just give me a minute, please.
No worries.
I'm just trying to find.
No worries, no problem. And I would like to appreciate everyone here with us in this session and hearing and discussing about all this perspective. It's been very, very good discussions, and looking forward to hear what Shimene has to share with us. Good presentation coming on. Shimene, thank you for that. So Dr. Shimene will be.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you see my slides?
Please.
Yes,
perfectly.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I know they tried to say we shouldn't use slides, but I prefer to use slides because it helps me to put my thoughts together. So thank you very much. My name is Shimene. I'm from Milpark Business School in South Africa, but I currently reside in Cameroon in West Africa. So the title of my presentation this afternoon is also slightly different from what is on the program. After I got feedback from the reviewers, I decided to change the title because I felt that the feedback was actually useful. So the title that I'm going to adopt is Jangiz as Pockets of Anti-Capitalist Activities. Okay. And in this presentation, I'm going to do a recap of the paper that I presented in this conference last year. I'm going to touch very briefly on the literature, on the methodology, on the findings and the conclusion. I just need to mention at this point that this is a work in progress. The study, I still need to carry out the study. So I'll really appreciate feedback from the very vocal group of participants that are online this afternoon. Okay, so in terms of a recap, last year I did a paper called From Feasting to Fasting, an autoethnography of Jangis. So what is a Jangi? A Jangi, it's an old business practice in Cameroon where members of a community contribute money to assist one another turn by turn. And in the paper that I presented last year, I used autoethnography to reflect on this practice. I was very intrigued with the Harambe that Andrew also presented on. So it's one of those African philosophies or practices that we have in our community. So in last year, I used autoethnography to reflect on Jangi as an indigenous African practice, business practice, to argue that the native is not insensible to ethics. And I was responding to Professor Neil Eccles' editorial that he wrote in the African Journal of Business Ethics. So in this paper, I build on that previous paper that I did last year to investigate the virtues embedded in different types of Jangis as pockets of anti-capitalist activities. So just briefly looking at the literature, obviously, we know that capitalism has fueled corruption in many countries. There's a lot of literature to argue that. So the term crony capitalism is also used to describe the relationship between politically connected capitalists and corrupt government officials to entrench various types of corrupt activities. I also see there's a paper that's been presented on crony capitalism in this track. So in addition to that, we have neoliberal policies introduced by the International Monetary Fund that have fostered crony capitalism in developing countries or in underdeveloped countries, like where I am here in Cameroon. And these neoliberal policies have deregulated economic sectors, privatized state-owned assets, and they have liberalized trade in African countries. So
Sorry, did we lose Ximene?
Bit of a stationary stop there.
Yeah.
Let me just see. I think we might have lost that connectivity.
I think it's having some connection issues. Ximene, maybe you can turn off camera.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn off your camera, and if you can maybe turn it off, it might help. Doesn't always, but let's see if that works. We actually need another connection point, but let's just see how that works. I think we might have lost her from our... There we go. Sorry, Chimene, we've just lost you there.
I'm unmuting myself. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Chimene, sorry, you're not coming through well at all. Why don't you try and put your camera off? And then let's just see if we've still got some sort of connectivity. It might be between the camera and the sharing that creates a problem.
Was it at this point? Okay.
Now I think we can.
That sounds better. Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah.
Okay, I've put off my camera. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I should stop. Okay. Shall I stop sharing? Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear you now. Now it sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I won't share mine. Let me just go back. So where I got, yeah. Where did I get cut off?
At the end of that slide.
At the end of that slide, but we've lost.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm good.
Yes.
I'm not going to share. I'm just going to go through it so that we can manage the connectivity.
Yeah.
Is that fine?
Fine, fine. Let's proceed. It's
Okay.
better for us to hear you than to see.
Okay, cool. So I don't know if you heard about the methodology.
I think if anyone doesn't mind, you can start from the top and then to make sure that everyone is you know, having all the information. Yeah.
Cool. So as I said when I started, the title of my paper is Jangis as Pockets of Anti-Capitalist Activities. And in this paper, I'm going to do a recap of the previous paper that I presented in this conference last year. I'm going to briefly touch on the literature and the methodology. I'm also going to touch on possible findings, and then I will conclude. And this is a work in progress, so I still need to develop this paper. So last year, I presented a paper on From Feasting to Fasting, an autoethnography of Jangis. And in that paper, I described the Jangi as an old business practice in Cameroon, where members of a community contribute money to assist one another turn by turn. And in the previous paper, I used autoethnography to reflect on Jangis as an indigenous African business practice, very similar to the Harambe that my colleague presented earlier, and to argue that the native is not insensible to ethics. And that was a response to Professor Eccles' editorial in the African Journal of Business Ethics. So in this paper, I build on that previous paper that I did last year to investigate the virtues embedded in different types of Jangis as pockets of anti-capitalist activities. So in the literature, I'm going to touch on capitalism. So capitalism has fueled corruption in many countries around the world. We've got the term chronic capitalism that is used widely to describe the relationship between politically connected capitalists and corrupt government officials to entrench various types of corrupt activities. We also have the neoliberal policies that has been introduced by the IMF that has fostered chronic capitalism in many countries in Africa. These neoliberal policies have deregulated economic sector. It has privatized state-owned assets, and it has liberalized trade in African countries. So in this study, I intend to use qualitative study. I'm going to adopt a phenomenology strategy because it accumulates in the essence of the experiences of several individuals involved in different types of Jangis. And interviews with members of different types of Jangis will unearth the merit in this practice and to give hope for an alternative to an extremely perverted practice, which is corruption. And then I'm also going to use critical reflexivity to accommodate the findings and the end goals of the research and to prompt deep introspection on questions raised during the research process. So what do I want to achieve from there? So in Cameroon, people enter Jangis for a variety of reasons. In principle, the practice was meant to assist business people to raise funds to do their businesses, right? Now the practice has evolved with different interest groups, such as farmers, housewives, colleagues, families, religious groups, property owners. They come together to raise money to assist one another in the activities that is common to their social group. I am suggesting that yes. Can you hear me? Hi there.
We can, yes.
I'm so sorry. So Jangis, like Ubuntu, is rooted in the values of care and love for one another. In Jangis, there's the informal community policing that ensures survivals of Jangis, and that could be seen as a way to guard against corruption amongst members in the Jangi group. So in conclusion, my recommendation from this paper could, in a small way, advance global thinking on the problems around the world. Thank you.
Sorry, Shimene,
I hope you managed to hear.
repeat? Can you repeat just the last part? You cut it a bit there.
Yeah, so I'm saying that the recommendation from this paper could, in a small way, advance global thinking on the problem of corruption that is endemic to societies around the world.
Thank you, Shimene, for this presentation.
I'm sorry about the connectivity.
No worries, we understand. It's you're very far, and it's normal. It's normal. Do we have any questions? I'm not seeing any comments in the chat, if I'm not mistaken. Neil, he's here. Neil, please feel free to ask your question or comment.
Thanks. I mean, it's a little question, and it suddenly struck me, given my reflections on history. Shamin, how old is the practice of Njangi? I mean, are there histories beyond like kind of modern times, or are there records of this kind of practice which precedes, you know, I don't know, how far back does the history of Njangi go? Thanks.
I wish I knew, Prof. I don't know. I haven't seen anything that's documented, but I was born and then I saw my parents doing it. I've never really asked my parents how far, you know, whether it's something that, but I think that's something that I need to look into to see when the practice started. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, if I can follow on.
Yes. Please.
I mean, because you know what's fascinating is does this predate capitalism in the context of of Cameroonian life? Is this a model which has persisted from pre-capitalist kind of societies, which is difficult to get your hands on? But you know, is this something which is from outside of capitalism, or is this an internal response to capitalist pressures? I guess. But yeah, I guess you speak to your parents and your grandparents and whoever else might bring the answers to that. Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks,
Prof,
Neil.
that's a very interesting question. I think knowing when the practice started would really help to answer whether that's something that started before capitalism. I haven't actually thought about it. I mean, you know, when you grow up and then you find something, it just feels like it's always been there. You never really think about asking when the thing started, but I mean, that's something that I'll look into because it will definitely give another perspective in terms of, you know, the influence of capitalism on this practice. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shimene, for this presentation. Andrew has a question. Please, Andrew, you may take the floor.
So mine is just a comment because you are still working on the paper.
Yes.
But, you know, like if you look at it, like if you go to Ethiopia, the same concept is there, and then they do it for raising meat so that when they have these religious meetings, they can give people meat. Okay.
Yes.
If you come to Kenya, we have it. We call it chama, and especially it's common with the women folk. They contribute funds and then they give this one. It's like a merry-go-round, you know.
Yes,
you go to,
definitely.
I think what then I could suggest is you could maybe just Google and do a research on across various communities in Africa and do a comparison. What concept or what variances are they having in the same concept? And then what happened is when you make a comparison with what is happening in Cameroon, you can have like a direction on what aspects are good, what is not working, and where is it heading to. Something like that.
Thank you so much for that, Andrew. I think that's...
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Shimene. I would also like to to make a comment or even a question if Shimene can answer. I don't know if it's if you have that information or not. So given that capitalism thrives in an environment where ethical oversight is lax, how can
Yes.
leaders ensure that ethical considerations are central to decision-making process, especially in the context where personal and professional networks overlap?
Okay, so is this question in terms of, government officials and stuff, not really in the Jangi practice?
Yes, yes, correct.
Oh my word. I wish I thought about that.
No, there's no worries. It's a curiosity of mine, so
Yes.
it's no worries if you cannot answer that. I have a comment from Neil saying in South Africa you have Stottles. A
Yeah.
trans-Africa study would be fascinating. Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. Thank you, Shimeni. Thank you again for presenting this to us. It was very good.
Thank you so
I don't
much.
know if anyone else has any questions for Shimene. If not, if it's possible, we proceed to the next panelist. I don't know if Nukunde is here, Dr. Nukunde. If not, may I ask Dr. Kali to do his presentation around fighting corruption in light of Ubuntu ethics, a South African perspective. Dr. Kali, are you available for do your presentation now? I know we have been, our schedule has been messed up a little bit, but I think we can work around. So Dr. Kali, are you free to do the presentation now?
Yes, I'm ready.
Yeah, so Dr. Kali is a research associate, University of Pretoria, PhD in professional and applied ethics from Charles Sturt University, and expertise in governance, risk, and compliance. Dr. Kali, please, the floor is yours. Feel free to start with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. The title of the paper that I'm still working on is Fighting Corruption in the Light of Ubuntu Ethic, a South African perspective. So the way I have structured my presentation, I've got 5 points. I think at the first point, I'll be looking at the corruption context globally. Then I will move into corruption in South Africa, its context. And then I will go into Ubuntu as a force for fighting corruption. Then I will move into different views of Ubuntu that are there, that are available in the literature. Some are talking about the death of it. Some are talking about the narrative of return and so on. And then I'll conclude by giving my verdict on Ubuntu as a force for corruption. So what are we having in the global space? We are having very interesting discussions and conversations going on there. And one of these discussions are happening in different forums, but the interesting fora is the World Economic Forum. In there is general consensus that fighting corruption is the key to addressing the world's most pressing problems. And there's this belief that indeed corruption is the center of this world pressing problems that lead to social vulnerabilities like inequality, poverty, discrimination, social exclusion, geopolitical instabilities, like we are seeing now what's happening, Ukraine, Russian, as an example there. But also it is in the midst of energy crisis. What we are seeing is that the oil prices are going up and down, gas problems. There's a whole lot of problems around energy. And also food crisis, for that matter. Food price inflation, it is really causing havoc across the world. So corruption globally, there's an agreement that it leaves countries destabilized, and it leads to state failures, and that's very true. It does. That's how its effects are felt globally. So the discussions there are saying, look, maybe this is time to institutionalize a new way of dealing with this corruption. So there's a proposal that there should be a new global corruption code. Very interesting discussion there. And I don't know what will be your take on it. Global corruption code. How would you look like? How would you work? And so on and so on. What have we learned from other institutions, But it's a fascinating proposal that I think is good that we think about it as we discuss this issue of corruption. So that is at a global stage. Now, fast forward, moving to the South African context. It's a very fascinating context when you talk about South Africa. To me, South Africa is a country of contradictions. And these contradictions dates back from colonialism itself up to now. And what I've done is just to categorize these contradictions in three forms. The first part will be the time that I call the gloom times. The gloom times. Then the second will be the hope times. And the last would be the despair times. So I just want to talk about those periods that I am seeing the issue of corruption being addressed in that context. What are these gloomy times? Colonial period, moving forward into apartheid, into Bantustan systems that we have, colonial systems, apartheid systems, Bantustan systems. There has been some sort of corruption going on there. So you can say there was colonialism corruption, there was apartheid corruption, there was Bantustan corruption. And the good article there to read there is by Jonathan Histop, Political Corruption Before and After Apartheid. I think it set the scene for us to understand what went on during that gloomy time that I'm referring to. But what was really happening there is that South Africa at that point in time, at that gloom time, it was the scorn of the world because of these policies that we adopted, and that really became the ground for thriving corruption. And we are not the darlings of the world, so to speak, at that point in time, because of the systems and the policies that we put in place that were discriminatory, but at the same time, they were kind of facilitating corruption to thrive. So corruption during those gloom time, it really got a fertile soil where it really took root in South Africa. So by the time of 1994, when the apartheid was dismantled, really corruption was its at height, has taken a root, so to speak, and it was at its heights between 1984 and 1994. And that was the time when now we have to transition to the time that I call hope, which is the new dispensation, the new democratic dispensation, where Mandela became the president. So Mandela period up until Suma time, that I will talk about later on, it was a time for hope, so to speak. 1994 was a watershed for hope in South Africa. One, we affected the civil war, that people thought that we cannot transition smoothly. There was Truth and Reconciliation Commission under Archbishop Tutu. Mandela presidency as well had that kind of aura that we had, followed by presidency of Mbeki, that also had its own aura. And the Nobel Peace Prizing winning of Tutu and Mandela, they kind of put South Africa in the map in the world, as the darling of the world, as a moral shima of the world, as a moral heavyweight of the world. And we were really examples of how things can be done despite problems that we had. But then during that period of hope as well, now corrupt activities, corrupt sentiments also begin to also crop in. If you can remember the issues around the arms deal, that during that period there, it really showed that this thing called corruption, it is really a big issue. It is endemic. It is really becoming a pandemic, so to speak, like Andrew was equating it to a pandemic. So it was simmering. It was, although hiding its head, but it seems to be really moving underground, really trying to show its ugly head. So that time of hope was kind of tainted by the arms deal issue, so to speak, where we begin to realize also, oh, it seems something is happening here. It was clearly in the public gaze at that point. Now, moving forward, then we enter the time I call despair time. This is when President Zuma took over his presidency. Right up until now, where we are in 2023. I think it is 2008 up to now, 2023. This is a time of despair for South Africans. Why? We saw the presidency of President Zuma entrenching corruption. We saw corruption really right in our face. Maybe it was there, it was a time of hope, but it was just underground, I suppose. It was under the surface. But here we began to really see it. We begin to really see its effects. Hence the state culture. And the report by the former public protector, Tuliman Patonsela, also bring to us really the realities of what? Of corruption. Then the Sondo Commission just really saw the statistics of corruption at grand scale in South Africa, that it is really a big problem. That has really led to the grey listing of South Africa in recent, I think it's last year or this year. So those are the effects. So at that point when these things happen, now that moral exceptionalism that South Africa had in the time of hope, where it was a moral shimmer, where it was a shining star, moral shining star of the world of Africa, I think it began to fade away. And some people have been saying that that moral exceptionalism is really dead. And we saw now the collapse of the country's GDP. We saw electricity cuts, for example. We saw water supply contamination. We saw COVID-19 fraud scandals, the digital vibes, PPE tenders, and now recently the whole issue about Pala Farmgate scandals. So these are the things that really became what I say despaired us as South Africans. And we are at a point of reflection, I suppose, where we are saying, what's really going on? What can we do? What can we do? This is where now my paper comes in and say, I think we need to go back to Ubuntu. We need to go back to Ubuntu to find answers from it. Ubuntu can be a force for fighting corruption. It has capacity for goodness. I think some people have talked about that yesterday. Professor Dion has talked about that. I think Professor Leon also talked about that. It has this capacity for force of goodness to tame this virus, this epidemic of corruption that is really changing from time to time. Change, it has different strains now. It's like COVID. Today you find another strain, and the next thing you find another strain. So we need to find how best we can use Ubuntu to attend to it. And the way these strains take, the way they emerge and shape themselves, we have seen that they can come from as selfishness, as greed, as self-seeking behaviors, as self-reaching conduct that I think people have talked about it since yesterday up until now. So the spirit of Ubuntu, we need to really to harness it. We need really to harness it. And I think the conference is all about that. How best can we harness this spirit of Ubuntu to help us to deal with this time? I think the way forward in that regard is to look at what is happening in the public space. A lot is being talked about Ubuntu, a lot is written about Ubuntu, and I'll just summarize what I've scanned through in these debates that I am talking about. Somebody is saying it is time to revive the principle of Ubuntu for good. To deal with corruption is a form of discrimination, is a form of human rights, and this is Reverend Sugizi. I think that's very fascinating as well. How do we revive the principle? Is it dead? Where is it? Is still living with us, or it is somewhere else? I think these are the kind of questions that we really need to discuss if we really want to harness Ubuntu as a force to fight corruption. One is saying the missing ingredient in the fight against corruption is Ubuntu. It is the missing ingredient. We need to really get it back so that it can help us. And another is saying we need to search for missing links of Ubuntu in the entire way of how we live in modern society, especially in the South African context. We need to really harness its spirit so that it can empower the anti-corruption efforts that we have started, that we are really looking at. Somebody said Ubuntu must be back. It's a big outcry, and it should really speak to corruption. And the absence of Ubuntu, that person called Hollanda is saying, look, the absence of Ubuntu, it is really the reason why corruption is at this rampant stage in South Africa. Very interesting take there. Another Chipola is saying Ubuntu is the antidote for corruption. And we really need to find out how best can we use Ubuntu. So within this kind of public discourse around Ubuntu, and there's a whole issue around, is Ubuntu dead or alive? Is Ubuntu dead or alive? And those people who talk about it as dead, there are a number of scholars there that talk about there. One of them is Matorino, for example, and Ngudingwi. They started this conversation in 2013, and Metz came in there to talk about it. Chimagona came in there. Kwenane, Atente in 2023, they are talking about the whole issue about Ubuntu. Is it dead or alive? I don't know what is your verdict in this regard, but it would be nice to hear from you. What do you think? Where is it? Where is the spirit of Harambee? Is it still alive? Is it still dead? Because Harambee is another way of or another word for Ubuntu, for example. Where is it? Is it alive? I don't know. I don't know where it is, but whatever where it is, I think my verdict is Ubuntu is attractive, it's a desirable ethic which could really contribute positively towards developing a moral character that we so need, to deal with the issue of corruption. It can help us to develop that moral characters of all the participants, all the stakeholders, that we are saying, let's collaborate to take a fight against corruption. It holds much hope in the fight against corruption. And to me, for it to do that better, Ubuntu needs to be adaptive, needs to be reflective to take the fight against corruption. It has to be adaptive, it has to be reflective. And I think that's why Neil was talking about, is there a way, can we think of reconstructing some of these things? How can we reconstruct Ubuntu to do the better job for us? I think that is the multi-million-dollar question that we need to think about. And so others have already written about some of these things to say Ubuntu must be reflexive. Ubuntu must be self-realizing. So if that is what Ubuntu should be, how do we play in this space to assist, to ensure that Ubuntu really becomes a force for fight against corruption? That's all what I prepared for you, and that I wanted to put forward for conversation around it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kali. That was very, very good. Before I open the floor, I would just like to read Neil's comment here because he needs to drop off. So he says, "Sorry guys, I need to drop out of the meeting. I have the following comments, questions for Kali though. You guys are trying to kill me. Mentioning the WEF as an authority, they are worse than a corruption perception index. Seriously though, don't you think it's interesting that they frame the biggest problem confronting humanity as corruption, which is the West definition itself out of, and not bribery? So the private sector, half of the problem is obscured. What are the narrative games at play here? Perhaps a continuation on Fanon's pointing out that the native is declared insensitive to ethics. Regarding a global corruption court, notwithstanding the preceding comment, I think we can be sure that the Americans will not be signatories to this, and that only people from the global south would ever be prosecuted. Regarding is Ubuntu dead or alive, I think that if it's not that, it has been profoundly corrupted by capitalist governing rationality, which is completely overwhelming our moral imagination. Dr. Kali, would you like to comment and respond to these questions?
Sure.
It was a lot.
That was a lot. That's a lot. Yeah. But I think the point, I take the point that Neil is making, honestly. And these are the conversations about Ubuntu that really are reflected in his comment here. And also, these are the troubling kind of comments that also we are reading about in different forums. And that's where I think when we talk about Ubuntu as a force against corruption, we really need to really take a deep breath and really say, what are we saying here? In what way? How can we indeed make Ubuntu to be that kind of a force that we are talking about? And not necessarily about theoretically talking about these things. In practical terms, how do we ensure that Ubuntu does really play a role? Can it? It can, but how do we, as agents, how do we assist it? I think that's where the whole point is. Thank you. That's all I can say, but I think Neil is right. His comments are spot on.
Thank you, Dr. Kali. I don't know if we have more questions. I think in some way Dr. Kali provoked Dr. Andrew in some point, but I don't see. I saw Shimene raising her hand, but I don't know if it was a mistake or she has really a question. If she does, please, Shimene, feel free to ask.
No, that was a mistake. I was actually
Was a mistake.
just also going through the comment by Neil, and it was
Yeah.
okay. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I have a question. If I can ask Dr. Kali, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but let's see. So, traditional values versus modern governance. As South Africa grapples with modern governance challenge, to what extent should Ubuntu be integrated into anti-corruption strategies? Could an over-reliance on Ubuntu in policy making inadvertently provide a cultural shield for corrupt practices, or it can offer a unique indigenous solutions to curb corruption?
Thank you so much for that, Adam. The traditional versus the modern. It's a fascinating debate, and that's why defining this kind of terms is very, very important. What we regard as traditional, what we regard as modern. At the end of the day, you'll find that this is just what semantics. It's just politics of these things. And if we can take politics out of the discussions of this importance, it will always be important. But yes, traditional values, anyway, using them, that word carefully, they can play a role. They can play a role in modern societies by helping us to rethink our way of how we approach all these strategies that we are talking about. If you have listened carefully to all the strategies, the plans, the codes that in the earlier panelist discussions, and we ask yourself, where do they come from? Are they home cooked in Africa, or they are from somewhere else? You'll find that those things are for somewhere else. They are elitist. Again, I want to repeat that. And that's where now Andrew with that layman person right there at home in the village under the tree. That person there has a wealth of knowledge, but we have disempowered him. He cannot get into the boardroom to be part of the discussion. And that is why I'm really skeptical about this whole issue of collaboration, let's collaborate. But who are we collaborating with, for example? The same people in the boardroom, the elephant in the room. That's why I was saying again, thorough stakeholder analysis as who is in the room for discussion is very, very important. But Ubuntu can really provide that kind of a shield, Adam. It can contribute. It can really give us ways of how we can, better ways of how we can deal with the scourge of corruption. I think that's why I'm saying it is attractive. It is indeed plausible that it can give us this kind of direction. But it is not a silver bullet. It is not a silver bullet. It cannot address all the problems that are confronting us. That would be unfair to look at Ubuntu to be providing that silver bullet for everything. Thank you so much.
I agree. Thank you, Dr. Kali, for that. Thank you for the lovely presentation and for sharing this with us. I don't know if anyone else has any more questions, and if not, then Dr. Nina, I don't know if you're ready for us. Dr. Nina is a master's in philosophy, higher education, and applied ethics in business ethics. She's also a lecturer, a researcher, and it's a lot of pleasure having Dr. Nina here with us. If you're ready, please, the floor is all yours, and please share with us your thoughts around the teaching of business ethics, understanding the purpose and current approaches. Thank you, Dr. Nina. Please feel free.
Yes, I am ready. I'm just also have some slides that I need to share, and yeah, there's no PhD just yet, so it's a plan in the future. Like the previous, good afternoon, everyone. Like the previous speaker, I found possibly the lecturing background that I have slides. Try not to overuse them, but yeah, they really do guide my thinking. So I just want to make sure you guys should see me and should see the slides.
Yes.
Okay, everything.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this I think is going to be something completely different to what we've listened to before. Let me just go back to the first slide. As mentioned, I'm coming kind of from the classroom, being a lecturer of business ethics, and definitely very enthusiastic about education. As you would be able to see later on during the presentation. So the essay or the theoretical paper that I'll be speaking about to you today is the teaching of business ethics, and I'll give some context and some background as to why I came across this topic. So the aim is to understand the purpose and the current approaches from literature. So just as a bit of an introduction, why this is worth investigating, or why this was worth investigating, I think it's an ongoing investigation, is that from the classroom and from kind of the educational space, we have a lot of lecturers questioning, and even more so just this year, a lot of students asking the questions about how we teach ethics. How do we teach it? Why do we teach it? Can it even be taught? And I think the last question specifically is coming across, I think it should come across quite a lot in our current society, is does teaching, training and ethics help? Can it actually change behavior? So again, speaks quite strongly about the aim of teaching and educating people and students in ethics. And I do think also it's relevant for students of business ethics. I always like to provide context, because traditionally business ethics students come from quite a commerce in South African context, an accounting kind of background. So it's not a module that's situated in the field of philosophy, although obviously we know it's kind of where its origins come from. So it's an interesting mix of teaching students philosophy, but they are kind of in a commerce space. So I think that's also where the questions come up with, why should we do philosophy, and does it help, and what is the aim of this? So that's basically what led me into this, into writing the paper, trying to investigate, what is said in literature about teaching it. Specifically, I think the interesting thing from an educational space, the question actually comes with, can it be taught? Which ethics would say, yes, you can teach ethical principles, as you can see on the screen, that if ethics is knowing what we should do, knowing how to act, knowledge like that can be taught. Again, from the educational side, the more relevant question, and one that's really not addressed, I think, uniformly in literature, is how do you teach it? So what is the teaching strategies that you take into the classroom to bring the ethical principles in? So that's what led me to look at the various approaches in literature. I think as a lecturer, and I think what I've learned across writing this, is I wanted to know, how should I do it? And not just from one or two articles or research. And you will also see, and I might mention it throughout, a lot of the studies on how to teach, or some of the strategies or examples, it's not necessarily very recent. So there's definitely, I thought there was a gap to try and research and see, okay, what's been written over the last 20 years? And has anyone looked at it, reviewed it, assessed it, and see, okay, what should we take from all of this, and how should we take it into the classroom? So I have reviewed some of the approaches suggested in literature, and just to give you a bit of an overview on the methodology that I adopted. So review of literature on the teaching approaches, and I could identify, which I will obviously discuss in a much more depth, one of the basis of the paper, is two frameworks that were the most comprehensive and actionable, if you call it. So with that, what I looked for broadly is, what could I take out of an article and just give into the classroom, and what's kind of comprehensive, because a lot of the articles have one suggestion. So they suggest case studies, also they suggest getting a guest speaker, where I looked for something that was quite comprehensive and that we could use in the classroom kind of as is. So the two frameworks that I identified that I will discuss throughout is Rousseau's teaching and learning competency framework for teaching ethics. And then one that was developed quite a few number of years later is a AMO framework, so ability, motivation, opportunity framework, that was adapted from Vroom 1964. It's actually a framework used in the work environment, was adapted by Edwards and Gallagher specifically for ethics teaching and ethics training. And what I found useful to do then is looked at some of the other approaches that suggests, why we teach, how to teach, and the kind of the goals of ethics education. And I realized that all of these examples, if you call it that in literature, can actually fit into the preceding framework. So what I try to do is kind of integrate the other approaches into these two frameworks. So at the end, I feel that the frameworks now are almost more authoritative because they kind of are supported by various other approaches in literature. So that's kind of what I thought of doing, so that you kind of have two approaches, and you'll see why I suggest that we combine the two approaches, not just use one or the other one. And by combining them, I'm quite hopeful that they would be able to like have a real change in education, but also they really involve a lot of the other examples that we see in literature when it comes to ethics education. So as I kind of mentioned, the aim of the paper was to review the frameworks and suggest the combined adoption of the two frameworks, as well as through just the mention of various sources, integrate some of the other approaches. And I'm hoping, at least I feel this as a lecturer, that it definitely provides me with a more well-rounded holistic approach, and it has some executable guidelines that we can use when we teach business ethics. Okay, so over to the first framework, as I mentioned, the TLC framework, the Teaching Learning Competency Framework for Ethics. It has 3 dimensions, which I will take you through now in the next few slides, just to kind of give you an overview that all 3 dimensions, as advocated by Rousseau 2002, needs to be adopted together. So it's not a one or the other framework approach. So you would do both cognitive, behavioral, and managerial competence when you teach ethics. Okay, so first dimension is cognitive competence, and this is basically theoretical foundation, if you want to call it that. So intellectual knowledge and the skills to identify, understand, analyze applied ethics matters. So in teaching in the classroom, you would basically create an awareness of ethics dimensions, teaching students the vocabulary and necessary theories needed, moral reasoning and ethical decision-making, which obviously we have various frameworks. So you can see at the bottom, some of these authors are in support of this as a competence. And they also suggest that the way that we then teach this is normally pretty traditional theory lecturing, introducing students to the vocabularies and various theoretical frameworks, but also have discussions and debates in the class. And this is to develop their sense of moral reasoning. I think we can never remind ourselves enough, the kind of students that often take business ethics are not very comfortable with having debates and discussions and projecting opinions. So even the smallest example of doing that should definitely be encouraged, but yeah, it often falls outside of their comfort zone. So discussions, debates definitely encourage, as well as using case studies, and that's to help students to understand that obviously there's ethical decision making and that there's a case that they would need to solve as such, or try and address the ethical dilemma. So that's the first competency. So really just giving students, in my mind, the theoretical knowledge to understand and navigate the world of business ethics, which brings us to the second competency, which is a behavioral competency. And that, as you can see on the screen, is this idea that, and I think we can all relate to this, that just because you have the knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that you have the willingness to behave morally, or that knowledge will go over into action. So Williams and DeWitt actually calls this stage the moral development stage, and they argue that that's obviously also definitely needed over and above this cognitive competence or this cognitive knowledge that students obtain. So this is cultivated through moral sensitivity, imagination, courage, and virtues. And it also links quite well to Kohlberg's moral development framework, in which he actually confirms that you can, develop students morally or people morally through education. Again, as an educationalist, the first thing that comes to mind is this is quite challenging to do, but it's always encouraging that it is actually possible theoretically. So there's some interesting examples from literature we can see it really moves at this point beyond the traditional kind of classroom space. How do you cultivate a sense of moral development within students? So there's a strong example in literature for using stories and films. And I think what I've also seen that is really, really encouraging is the amount of documentaries that we have to our availability to share with students. That really does provide quite a nice platform for them to think on, obviously, normally real world examples of things that happened. And another example that comes across quite strongly in literature, and I'll mention it a few times still, is journaling. And this allows students to reflect on their learning. So it allows them to kind of write down or just think, oh, what did I learn? Again, these students are very comfortable with that. So it's quite interesting to see that that's an example that's used for them to think about and reflect on, what did I learn from this documentary, or what did I pick up in class? And that's also been proven. Journaling and reflection has been proven to enhance moral development. This is the second competency, just encouraging behavioral change and navigating the space where students are able to go over more than just the competency. So then the third competence is managerial, and this comes specifically given the fact that these students, we're not trying to just educate them kind of morally for themselves, but also eventually they need to go out into the workplace. So the skills that they apply or they learn, they should be able to apply to solve ethical problems in the workplace. So because of this, the need for the third competency is that certain tools and frameworks should be introduced to develop their skills and able to navigate that in an organization. As we all know, obviously organizational setups are a lot different. So there's also a strong call that we need to educate them for the workplace. So for that, ethical leadership, the importance of ethics in organizational ethics, and the governance of ethics. Also here, traditional lecturing is encouraged to teach students the frameworks, much like you have in cognitive competency. Interesting case studies again called for. What is always interesting to me reading that there's a big motivation for authentic case studies. So apparently making up a nice case study is not enough. It has to be an authentic real life story. It helps students actually understand and see the relevance and realize that this might also be a problem that they face one day, and it's not just a fictitious case that someone wrote. That as well as reflection again comes up. So interesting example where it's called that the lecturer should reflect with the students in class to demonstrate to the students how you think as a lecturer, how you would argue your way through this, how you could potentially make a decision. And I want to say, according to literature, if you model your thinking and your reflective values to the students, it enables them to do the same. Which again, if you think to any traditional classroom, a lot of that, unfortunately, I don't think is really happening, and it's very challenging in an educational space to be able to have a platform where you reflect with the students, and that's again should be encouraged, but I think it is quite challenging. So the framework obviously provides, I think, quite a comprehensive overview of what we can do as business ethics lecturers in the classroom to help our students navigate business ethics better, to help them to understand the theory, to help them to move towards behavioral change, and to navigate the workplace successfully. But after reviewing this and integrating all the literature, I think, and again, I don't think I would have had this question if I wasn't in the classroom. A big question that came to me was, if we do this, how do we know if it works? So if the framework, and you can see there's a question on the screen, how do we measure this? And again, it's definitely, I think, the educational question of, is your teaching effective, is a question that comes up a lot. And I think in something like ethics and moral development, it's a question that'll probably never be exhausted, because a lot of what we teach or what we expose our students to, we don't see, because it's things that they're only going to enact when they're in the workplace one day. We don't get to see them when they're facing that ethical dilemma. But I do think if I take a step back, and when I wrote this, I realized, well, this is a very, very important question to consider, because we don't have a good corporate climate, and we don't have long periods of time without ethical failures in organizations. And we don't want to say that, I don't want to say ethics education is the only reason for that, but I also have to say, well, so many students are being exposed to ethics education, yet the current corporate climate and the various ethical failures that we see just makes me ask that question. So the frameworks, the teaching approaches, how do we know if it works? So that led me to look and say, okay, if we have this very, very good TLC framework that I think provides such a good platform, maybe we should try and take it one step further and say, okay, change behavior maybe is not enough. Maybe we should go and say, we need students to develop this unconscious competency, or that's kind of what I refer to it as, or an ingrained competency. So not just knowing that I was taught to do X, Y, Z, and therefore I will, but if it gets difficult, they might not, but almost that you change their identities. It's also something that Kohlberg's moral development confirms, this highest level of moral development, true change, that you will act according to the values, no matter what the consequences. That kind of extreme that we know is all very idealistic, but very, I think, important as educationalists to try and achieve. So that's kind of what made me realize that maybe we need a kind of a fourth competency, and say, okay, how can we ingrain this unconsciously into the very kind of being of the students? And that's where the adapted AMO framework comes in. When I looked at that framework, it actually provides some of the answers that we could use and work towards to achieve the goals of being of teaching ethics, to make it more ingrained in the students. So the adapted AMO framework, originally, just some background, as I mentioned earlier, was developed to do workplace actions and motivation. So it centers on the ability, motivation, and opportunity that guides workplace conduct. And Edwards and Gallagher, the authors of the framework, or the authors that adapted it, developed the ethical AMO. And their problem was, exactly as it stands on the slide, that students continue to struggle to act ethically, even if they were exposed to ethics teaching and training, when they are faced with real world problems. So their argument is that we need to internalize learning, which again moves beyond just changed behavior, and I think really starts to touch on the ingrained, unconscious. Internalization of learning means it really kind of changes us from who we are from the inside. And the framework has 3 approaches, and I will just introduce them, and then I will share some examples on the next slide of how to try and effect this internalization. So they say that we should create space in the classroom or in the teaching approach to enhance students' ability to internalize learning, also enhance their opportunity, and then enhance their motivation. So they have various examples, and some of them are the same strategies that you can use to do ability, opportunity, and motivation. But the argument is, if you do these, if you have a teaching environment that cultivates these 3 areas of ability, opportunity, and motivation, it'll at least create a space where students are able to move into, can I say, a space of lasting change, which again, I think is the ultimate goal. So they have various examples, and as you can see on the bottom, it's also supported by various authors, although, as I mentioned in the article, not always explicitly, because some of these came before the framework, but their examples of teaching approaches aligns quite nicely with what the framework mentions. So again, and a lot of this is also touched on in the TLC framework, but I think at some spaces it moves beyond, or for me, it just highlights the importance of using these strategies. So they mentioned that students should have a space in the classroom to discuss their values and beliefs. And this, interestingly enough, includes the lecturer also sharing, as I mentioned earlier. So rather than asking the students to share, the lecturer should also share. It creates a safe space. If the lecturer will share, the students will also feel more comfortable. What is really interesting when it touches on the values of it is that students who are exposed to business ethics teaching are quite young normally, and they actually have never had a systematic inquiry into their values and beliefs. So the argument exists that we teach them certain values and beliefs and frameworks, and then we put them in the workplace and we suddenly expect that they will know how to navigate that world, where they've never had an internal systematic inquiry. So it is as simple as asking students to write down their values, which for someone of 20 years of age, they've possibly never done. I actually tried that in my class this year, and it was interesting because you could see it's not a question that they are necessarily ever faced with, which again made me realize how important this is as a first step to, as the framework mentions, just create the ability or start creating the ability. Another interesting thing, which I also think is often difficult to mediate, is allowing for different opinions. This enables students to not just start creating the ability, but there's the opportunity where they can freely share their opinion. I think specifically in our very diverse classrooms in the South African context, we have students with very diverse opinions and backgrounds, and this can be sometimes challenging where they are polar opposites on certain things, but it's important that we create that space where no specific opinion is valued above others. And I do think other modules here count against our favor, because I think in a lot of other modules of teaching, there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and they kind of know what answer they should give or what opinion they should have. So it's very important that there should be, again, this discussion, very open, everyone's opinions kind of matter all in the same way. And then another strategy is getting students to write their own personal ethical codes, which again touches for me on the values. And then Mary Gentile's Giving Voice to Values framework, that she also writes extensively about asking students certain questions in class, much like asking them to share their values, also cultivates the ability. So for me, it's a very reflective, personal question approach, more than just teaching frameworks or even having debates. And then again, there's an increased focus on reflection, journaling, and even mindfulness. The argument is that also journaling creates the ability, so it teaches students to write down their thoughts, and structured journaling, which I know doesn't happen often, specifically in the commerce field, that these students have their training, creates the opportunity that they then get to write down. And that also helps them to learn, because students learn from their own reflection. And then a last example, as I've also mentioned previously, authentic case studies seem to be very, very important, which again, we luckily have a lot of examples of, although not all positive, but it does really guide, and also guest speakers guide students' motivations because they can see for real why it matters. So not fictitious case studies, not case studies from textbooks, actual things that happened in the real world, helps them understand why this is important. So yeah, for me, this framework kind of moves a bit beyond the TLC framework, and I think supplements the teaching strategies quite nicely, away from theory, more towards reflective journaling, discussion-based. So it's encouraging to see those strategies really work. So therefore, my suggestion at the end of this article is to adopt both of the frameworks in class, for a lecturer to say, well, I'll use the TLC and add the dimensions of the adapted AMO framework, because this will help students to actually think and reflect and be challenged and experienced on what ethical behavior is. and it could influence how they engage as students and as employees, and really think about who they are rather than just what to do. And I think that's, for me personally, quite a big aim as a lecturer, to cultivate the internal change or the internal reflection of a student. So yeah, basically to conclude, I'm going to go back to the first question where I said, is our teaching effective? A question I'll probably deliberate for a long time still to come. I do believe if we teach using an internalization of learning approach, or trying to navigate the classroom in that sense, we can move in the right direction, and hopefully have a teaching approach for business ethics that really does change students and internalize their learning. And yes, thank you. That is it.
Thank you, Nina. This was a lovely presentation. I enjoyed it very much, and it is quite very interesting, the methodologies around it. I don't know if any participant has any questions. You can raise your hands if you have any questions. I'm trying to see the chat here, but I don't see no one asking a question. Feel free to ask any question. I have some questions for you, Nina, but it's also a bit of my interest to know, the technological disruption versus ethical framework. So with this rapid rise of technologies like artificial intelligence, how do you think should the teaching of business ethics evolve to address the novel ethic dilemmas? Is there a risk that conventional ethical curricula could become obsolete, leaving future business leaders ill-equipped for modern challenges? What are your thoughts around it?
I think, yeah, so far, I also think I teach second year students, so they, when I say the understanding sometimes of the business environment is limited, unfortunately. So it is challenging and that's also one reason why I think I try not to always bring in too many examples, because it does fall out of their reach. So as far as challenges in the business environment, we can take it back to, I want to say, their personal lives and how, I want to say, artificial intelligence affects that. And for me, it's a very small incremental changes. So for a second year student like last year to realize that, I shouldn't just put all my opinions on social media, for example, is a small win. I think sometimes we can go too large in trying to solve the world with these students, but to make them realize that, wow, I should actually revalue what I think about social media platforms, or in our case, obviously common in university, how I use ChatGPT. So we would joke about that, but that's the challenges that they face. So I think if they can think critically about that, then hopefully it'll develop the skills for them to think critically about a challenge that they face in the business world. I don't know if that answers your question to an extent.
Yes, completely. Very, very, very nice. One other question that I have, it's with regards to, so how can the teaching of business ethics strike a balance between universal ethical principles and respect for cultural relativism? Can one size fit all framework? Do you think this is something that really has some conflict around it? The global ethics plus versus what is cultural, practice?
It is also actually interesting, because I think that ideally it's something that we would be able to investigate at quite a lot of depth. But I'm also mindful of the students that we have and that we teach. Like I mentioned, I think I discussed quite extensively in the article the background of the students. So normally you have Bachelor of Accounting, and I know sometimes you've got MBA students, but in our case it's undergrad. So the level in which you can engage with them on high philosophical frameworks, unfortunately, although it's ideal and it's great, I think it's not very realistic. So we engage with culture as far as for them acknowledging that there's different opinions in different cultures, They would, and again, it's something that even moves quite far beyond the traditional classroom. It's uncommon for students to share, I'm come from this culture, and in our culture we do this, because in their classroom it's not about sharing always. So again, the smallest of wins I will take. So this year, for example, just the acknowledgement that, and last year it happened as well, when we had a bit of a research study on what students learned, the acknowledgement that everyone doesn't share my worldview. That's as far as I want to say I'll take the win. I think getting them at that level second year to appreciate all the other cultural context, whether it's African or international, I think that's a bit idealistic, because they don't even understand their own values. Last year I had a big realization that what I was raised in my family as values and morals doesn't have to be what I subscribe to. And a few years older, some of us might think, well, that's pretty obvious that you shape what you believe in. But for them, it was a watershed moment. I remember this one girl in my class was like, wow, I don't have to follow everything. And I think that's also where the culture thing comes in. There's an awareness of their own culture. So what is unique to my culture versus what other culture might have been exposed to? And wow, if that person has an other opinion than me, that doesn't make that person wrong. Because this is the only philosophical module that they would be exposed to. So again, for me, it's baby steps. And because I don't traditionally come from philosophy, I think it actually adds a bit to my benefit, because I'm not trying to push too much. And I don't think business ethics should. I think it should just, as the framework mentioned, equip them for the business world, but have a sound understanding of what they are and who they are. And that does take culture into account. Maybe it'll spark the interest in this, and they'll study philosophy after this, but we can only hope.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nina. That clears all. We have Kali here. Dr. Kali would like to ask a question. Please take your mic off the mute and you can ask your question.
Thank you so much, Nina. Very, very interesting, really, this different way of how we go about teaching ethics. Yes, it is a real question, really, and I don't think it has been really addressed sufficiently. But it's good that the discussion around it still continues. And I like the way you have really come out in terms of how you would like to combine what you have and suggest a new way of doing it. There is no best way of doing it. But what is very interesting to me, I've always reflected on this also as a student of ethics, and say, who should be the teacher of ethics, honestly? Should it be a philosopher? Should it be a lawyer? Who should be the teacher of ethics? Like you're saying, it seems we are talking about it in the classroom. The same students, after that class, they go and do something else, very unethical. And you ask yourself, where is the learning here? You go to the corporate world, we teach these things. We have workshops and so on and so on. The same person who has just entered that workshop, the next morning, guilty of unethical conduct. Are we suitable teachers? Are we the right teachers? I don't know. What is your take here? Who should be the teacher of ethics, really?
Well, I do think, I was also undergrad student of business ethics when I studied undergrad accounting. So I remember distinctly that I didn't appreciate it. I would never have thought, and that's maybe what sparked, a bit of a longer story, but that's maybe what sparks my interest, because I would never have thought as a 20-year-old I would be very passionate about this field. I can't say back then it wasn't presented well, but I do, since I've lectured it, and I'm also obviously a student in business ethics, realize that it is a bit of a cross discipline, because you can't just input a philosopher into a group of commerce students. But I want to say, on a side note, I think there's a lot of other modules at university that has that problem. Much like I think you can't just, put philosophy lecture into engineering ethics, for example. Or the same happens with accounting students if they had to do a law module. I think the business ethics is not alone, but I do think because of the difference, the wide difference between your skills that commerce students are not just trained for, but are comfortable with. You input something on the complete other side of the spectrum, being philosophy. So like I said, even as simple as a student having to answer an opinion-based question, I could see how uncomfortable that is to them. But in other lecturers, you have law backgrounds, you have philosophy backgrounds, you have a lot of auditing backgrounds as well. It is kind of cross-discipline, but I found the education background, which I think is often not necessarily looked for when lecturing it, does provide quite a nice background, because I could ask does this actually work question a lot. So it's not just about teaching the theory, because that can be done. It's, okay, does this actually help? Do they get something from this? So maybe the answer is not that simple, but maybe that's also why I'm so passionate about it, because I do understand that it's not just one discipline. I think that solves this problem. Certainly not for advanced studies, but I think in an area like business ethics, possibly engineering ethics, medical ethics, any undergrads where their area is not philosophy, yet we're asking them to do philosophy. How does it not just go over their heads? And then they've actually had all these valuable tools that could help them, but it wasn't harnessed properly. So yeah, maybe it's a long work in progress still, but yeah, the best we can do for now is other projects is actually trying to get feedback from students. And it's not perfect because it's only their year still. I can't speak to them in 10 years from now, but so far we can do that. What did you learn from this year? Get their stories, get their feedback, and get a sense of how they possibly changed during the semester, which again is not solving the long problem of did it work over the course of their life in the workplace. But I do think that effective kind of feedback loop helps. So I think maybe education is also helping a bit to solve that problem.
So true. Can I follow up on that as well?
Yeah, sure.
Do you think with the teaching, do we start it at the right place? For example, at the university level, for example, or this thing should be really taken back to the primary, secondary level. If really we are serious about really ethics taking root into, especially when we talk about internalizing it. If we really want to internalize the learning of ethics, do you think we are starting to teach it at the right place, or we need to go deeper than that, go earlier than that, maybe at the primary, secondary? What is your thoughts on that?
I mean, I've looked at a few researchers and scholars who definitely advocate for that, teaching and demonstrating with examples how you can ask, primary schools or even toddlers certain questions that cultivate a sense of ethical decision making. So I do think so, but I also realize that in a lot of our societies that doesn't necessarily happen because we come from such various different contexts. So we can say that this should happen from very early on. Even at 5, 6, 7 years old, and the school system should cultivate this. I definitely think so, because I think it having the tools makes a big difference, because it's one thing making a decision, but if you never, like that example I mentioned earlier, if you never questioned your own values, how do you know if you're going against it? Which seems so obvious to us, but ask a student of 19 what their values are, and I don't think they've ever thought about it. So yes, I think the schooling system should, from a very young age, but I'm also very realistic that I don't think that happens. Like, I'm gonna say various other things that could, but doesn't. But I do think so, because it's in the small questions. It's the what is important to you, what is your value, what did you, small reflective journaling exercises. Again, I think that Kohlberg moral development frameworks was actually developed for kids at school originally. I don't think it was developed for for adults initially. So what was developed from another framework. So yeah, it's possible and it should happen, definitely.
Thank you so much,
Fantastic.
Nina.
Thank you, Dr. Kali. Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much for this lovely presentation. I got to learn a lot today. It was very nice. I don't know if anyone else has any more questions for Nina. I don't see any questions on the chat. No one is raising their hand. And I think we have concluded our interventions because Dr. Promise is not here, and Nukundi is also not here. So, Paul, I don't know if we can wrap it up if we have no more questions and no more interventions. And I want to thank you all again for being here and having this fruitful discussions around all of this very important topics that we need to take care of, also very related to ethics and compliance and anti-corruption. It was a very, very good afternoon that I've been with you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.